For over 75 years, one mystery has refused to die. Was it really a weather balloon or something not from this Earth? In today's video, we'll uncover the truth behind Roswell, the event that sparked America's UFO obsession. We're cutting through decades of lies, declassified documents, and conspiracy theories to answer one burning question: what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico, in 1947? The year was 1947. The Cold War had just begun. The world was tense, paranoid, and obsessed with the sky. Then came a crash in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico. Newspapers screamed, "Flying saucer recovered," only for the U.S. military to quickly retract the story, claiming it was just a weather balloon. But witnesses told a different tale: strange debris, unearthly materials, and even rumors of alien bodies. In this video, we're going to dig deeper than ever before beyond the myths, the cover-ups, and the Hollywood versions to explore the Roswell incident from every angle. Military, the desert of New Mexico. 1947. A lightning storm rages across the night sky. Out on the Foster Ranch, miles away from civilization, a rancher named William Mac Brazel rides out the storm with his family, unaware that by morning, his quiet life will collide with one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. The storm passes, and dawn breaks over the open plains near Roswell. The air smells of wet dust, and the land is eerily still. But something catches Brazel's eye, something strange scattered across the field. Metal debris, thin as paper but impossible to bend or burn, scattered over hundreds of yards. He bends down to pick it up, feeling its strange texture. This isn't wood, rubber, or anything he's seen before. It's light, flexible, and covered with odd symbols that shimmer in the sunlight. At first, Brazel doesn't think much of it. Strange things fall from the sky now and then, planes, balloons, even wartime debris. But this feels different. As the days go by, neighbors come to see it. Word spreads across Roswell like wildfire. What is this strange wreckage? Curiosity turns to speculation, and soon, the whispers begin. Could this be one of those mysterious flying saucers that people have been talking about in the newspapers lately? Because just weeks earlier, in June 1947, a man named Kenneth Arnold had reported seeing 9 shiny objects speeding through the sky near Mount Rainier, describing them as saucer-like. The phrase flying saucer had just entered American vocabulary, and the nation was obsessed. So when Brazel finally drives into town to report what he's found, he walks straight into history. He tells the local sheriff, George Wilcox, about the wreckage. Wilcox, unsure what to make of it, contacts the nearby Roswell Army airfield. Within hours, the military arrives. Major Jesse Marcel, an intelligence officer, is dispatched to investigate. He and a team follow Brazel back to the ranch, where they begin collecting debris. Marcel is stunned by what he sees. There's metal that feels like foil yet can't be dented or torn. There are strange beams with purple symbols, unfamiliar to any known writing system. And there's so much of it covering an enormous area as if something had exploded mid-air. Marcel gathers samples and loads them into his car, driving them back to the base for analysis. He's intrigued, maybe even excited. After all, the Air Force has been on alert for any unusual aerial phenomena since the end of World War II. Rumors of secret Soviet weapons and advanced aircraft are everywhere. But this doesn't look like anything man-made. It doesn't resemble a plane, a missile, or even an experimental craft. That night, Marcel stops by his home to show his family. His wife and son remember him spreading the strange metal pieces out on the kitchen floor, marveling at how they crumple in your hand, then instantly flatten out again as if alive. The next morning, July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield releases a statement that shocks the world. The press release reads, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc." The local paper runs the headline in bold letters, "RAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." Within hours, the story explodes across national media. Radios buzz with talk of aliens and crashed spacecraft. People across America look up at the night sky, wondering if we're truly alone, but the celebration doesn't last long. Less than 24 hours later, the military changes its story. A new press conference is held. This time, a different officer appears before the cameras, holding up pieces of debris that look suspiciously ordinary. He smiles and explains to the press that the so-called flying saucer was nothing more than a weather balloon. The official line is clear: there's nothing unusual about Roswell, just a simple misunderstanding. The excitement fizzles and the world moves on, or so it seems. But behind the scenes, confusion reigns. Major Jesse Marcel, the very man who handled the debris, is bewildered by the change in narrative. He knows what he saw in that field wasn't a weather balloon. Other officers whisper about secrecy, about orders from higher up to stay quiet. Even Brazel, the rancher, is reported to have been detained for several days by the military and told to keep his mouth shut. When he finally returns home, he's a different man, nervous, withdrawn, refusing to talk about the incident ever again. Meanwhile, locals who claim to have seen the crash site tell stories that don't match the official version. Some say the wreckage wasn't just metal, it came from something far larger, something that hit the ground with tremendous force. Others whisper about military trucks arriving in the middle of the night, hauling away large pieces of wreckage under armed guard. A few even claim to have seen bodies small, humanoid, and not of this world. The legend begins to take root, and soon the Roswell incident becomes more than a news story. It becomes a symbol of something hidden, something extraordinary buried beneath the desert sands. Decades later, historians, journalists, and UFO researchers will trace the roots of America's UFO obsession back to this single event. A crash in a lonely New Mexico field that launched thousands of theories, countless investigations, and one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. The spark that ignited the question still asked today: did something truly alien fall from the sky that summer night in Roswell? Or was it something much closer to home, hidden under the veil of secrecy and fear that defined the post-war era secrecy eyewitness accounts, government files, and scientific analysis? The story that once electrified America, the story of the flying disc found in Roswell, was about to take an unexpected turn. On July 8, 1947, the news had exploded across radio stations and newspapers nationwide. The U.S. Army Air Force had recovered a flying saucer. It was the first and only time an official military statement ever used that phrase. For one brief moment, it seemed like confirmation of the impossible. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. By the next morning, the very same military base that announced the discovery was calling it a mistake, claiming the debris came not from a spacecraft, but from an ordinary weather balloon. The speed and precision of that reversal were staggering, and it left a deep scar of doubt that never truly healed. At the center of the shift was the U.S. military's need to maintain control of the story, of public perception, and perhaps of something far more secret. When reporters from across the country began flooding Roswell with questions, the Air Force quickly clamped down. Major General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, ordered the wreckage to be flown to his headquarters immediately. When Major Jesse Marcel arrived carrying what he believed was evidence of something extraordinary, Ramey ushered him into his office, shut the door, and replaced the debris with pieces of a standard weather balloon. Moments later, photographers were called in, and the press was shown what appeared to be nothing more than tinfoil, sticks, and rubber. In the official photographs, Ramey kneels beside the balloon material with a calm smile, as if the whole affair were nothing but a misunderstanding. The story hits the wire again, this time with a completely different tone. Army debunks Roswell flying disc as weather balloon. Across the country, editors retract their earlier headlines. Skeptics scoff. The excitement collapses under the weight of military authority. The incident that had captivated the world for a single day vanishes as quickly as it appeared. But beneath the calm surface, many of those involved are left confused and uneasy. Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who first handled the debris, feels humiliated. Privately, he tells friends and family that the material he collected in Roswell was nothing like what was displayed in Fort Worth. He insists that he was forced to pose with balloon parts for the cameras, while the real debris was whisked away to an undisclosed location. His account would remain quiet for decades, but those who heard it believed him. Marcel wasn't some random witness, he was a decorated officer trained to recognize aircraft materials. If he said it wasn't a weather balloon, people listened. Meanwhile, local residents in Roswell noticed strange behavior from the military. Soldiers arrive at the crash site again, sealing off areas that were previously open. Trucks rumble in and out at all hours, loaded with crates. Witnesses claim they're threatened or told to keep silent. Rancher Mac Brazel, the man who first found the wreckage, suddenly disappears for several days after meeting with military officials. When he reappears, he's withdrawn and uneasy, offering vague answers to reporters. Something about his demeanor feels off, as if he's been warned or worse, coerced. Rumors start to spread that the government isn't just covering up a mistake, they recovering up the truth. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for suspicion to grow. It was the early days of the Cold War, and secrecy was the rule of the day. America was testing new weapons, new aircraft, and new surveillance technologies. The atomic bomb had changed everything. People had learned to accept that their government might hide things for national security, but this time, the secrecy felt different. It wasn't about protecting the country, it felt like protecting a secret too big to comprehend. Within weeks, the weather balloon explanation became the official story. Reporters moved on to other news, and Roswell faded into the background. But behind closed doors, questions continued to simmer. Why had the military been so quick to confirm the flying disc story in the first place? Why had they sent a highly trained intelligence officer to retrieve something supposedly so ordinary? And why, after all the confusion, did so many witnesses describe materials and shapes that didn't match a balloon at all? To understand how fast and coordinated the reversal was, you have to look at how the message was handled. The first press release from Roswell wasn't written by an overeager soldier. It was approved by Colonel William Blanchard, the base commander of the 509th Bomb Group, the only nuclear-capable unit in the world at that time. This was no small decision. For such a man to allow a statement claiming recovery of a flying disc meant he believed the evidence was real. Yet, within hours, his superiors silenced the story. The command structure from Fort Worth to Washington seemed to move with precision, like a machine built to erase the narrative before it spread further. Some historians suggest the reversal was simply a bureaucratic overreaction and miscommunication between field officers and headquarters. But others see a deliberate strategy. If something classified had indeed crashed, whether alien or man-made, controlling the narrative was critical. The fewer people asking questions, the better. And so the weather balloon story became a convenient shield, one simple enough for the public to accept and dull enough to make journalists lose interest. Years later, when government documents began to surface under the Freedom of Information Act, they revealed just how tight the information flow had been in the summer of 1947, reports and memos referencing. Unusual wreckage or flying discs were classified, restricted, or destroyed. It was as if the entire Roswell episode had been scrubbed from history in real time. The message was clear: there would be no more talk of UFOs, not from the military, not from the press, and certainly not from witnesses. Yet, for those who had seen the original debris, the new explanation never fit. They remembered materials that defied logic, shapes that seemed engineered beyond human capability. They remembered the excitement of discovery and the chilling speed with which it was erased. For them, the Roswell reversal wasn't just about a crash in the desert. It was about trust, about how quickly truth could be rewritten when power demanded silence, and how one event in a small, New Mexico town became the first great test of America's willingness to believe its own government. In the quiet town of Roswell, the shock of the sudden government reversal didn't erase the whispers, it only made them louder. People who had seen the wreckage, or who knew someone who had, began to talk in private, telling stories that didn't match the official weather balloon explanation. And it wasn't just debris that people claimed to see. Some witnesses spoke about something far stranger, something that made even the most skeptical locals shiver. They said there were bodies. Small, pale, not human. And whatever crashed in that desert, they insisted, wasn't just a machine it carried passengers. One of the first to hint at this was Major Jesse Marcel himself. Though he never publicly claimed to have seen alien bodies, he told his family that the military had recovered far more than just metal fragments. He described how the debris was quickly sealed, shipped away, and replaced with something ordinary for the press to see. But as he spoke, his words hinted that there was more, something so secret it couldn't even be acknowledged. And as years passed, others began to fill in the blanks. Local mortician Glenn Dennis became one of the most controversial figures in the Roswell story. In 1947, Dennis worked at Ballard Funeral Home, which often provided services for the nearby Roswell Army Airfield. He claimed that one day, shortly after the crash, he received a strange phone call from the base mortuary officer. The officer asked specific, unsettling questions: how to preserve small bodies that had been exposed to the desert elements, what chemicals to use on tissue that had deteriorated, and how to seal bodies to prevent odor during transport. Dennis thought it was an odd request, but he answered professionally. Then later that evening, he was called to the base to deliver some small caskets. When he arrived, he said he was stopped by an officer who warned him never to speak about what he saw. But before being escorted out, Dennis claimed he glimpsed a scene inside the hangar wreckage being examined, uncovered stretchers being moved past guarded doors. The atmosphere was tense, electric, as if something extraordinary had just happened. His story would emerge decades later, dismissed by some as hearsay, but supported by others who said they'd heard similar accounts. Even the nurse Dennis said confided in him, before disappearing under mysterious circumstances, allegedly described seeing small bodies unlike anything human, fragile, with large heads and dark, almond-shaped eyes. Though her identity was never confirmed, her supposed account became one of the most chilling elements of the Roswell legend. Then there were the civilians who lived near the crash site. Many of them described how military trucks arrived in the dead of night, headlights off, engines low, collecting not just debris but crates long enough to hold something other than metal fragments. A few said they were told at gunpoint to forget what they'd seen. One ranch hand recalled being warned that if he ever talked, he'd be digging his own grave. In small towns, word spreads quickly, but fear spreads faster. Within days, everyone who had been curious about the wreckage was either silent or gone. Decades later, when researchers reopened the Roswell case in the late 1970s and 1980s, these old stories resurfaced. Eyewitnesses who had remained silent for 30 years began to talk, their memories still vivid. Some described soldiers loading tarp shapes onto trucks, guarded closely. Others spoke about debris that looked like lightweight metal, but had strange hieroglyphic markings that seemed almost decorative, like writing from another world. One elderly woman said she'd been a teenager at the time and that her father, who worked briefly for the military, came home shaken and told her never to repeat what he'd seen. The secret, he said, was not from Earth. Investigators began to notice a pattern. The people who claimed first-hand knowledge of bodies were consistent in their descriptions. They all spoke of creatures roughly 4 feet tall, with slender frames and oversized heads. The eyes were described as dark and slanted, the skin pale and grayish, the limbs long and thin. They wore no clothes, no equipment, just smooth, featureless skin. For many, these accounts became the foundation of the Roswell alien image that would later dominate pop culture. Yet for others, it was proof of how stories evolve over time, details blending fact, rumor, and imagination. The government, of course, denied everything. When the Air Force finally revisited Roswell in the 1990s, it claimed that the stories of bodies were not aliens at all, but dummies used in high-altitude parachute tests years after the Roswell incident. But even that explanation raised eyebrows. How could people in 1947 confuse for crash test dummies that didn't exist yet? How could so many different witnesses, separated by time and background, describe nearly identical beings? Then there were the testimonies from within the military itself. Some former officers near the ends of their lives began to speak more freely. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, in his 1997 book, The Day After Roswell, claimed that the wreckage recovered from Roswell was indeed extraterrestrial and that it was secretly reverse-engineered, leading to advances in technology, like microchips, fiber optics, and night vision. His claims were controversial and largely unproven, but they reignited the fire around Roswell. giving new credibility to the idea that something extraordinary had indeed fallen from the sky. To the people of Roswell, the story of alien bodies has always been the part that feels most personal. It's the whisper you hear at the diner, the secret past between generations, the thing that can't quite be proven but never dies. The witnesses may have aged, the documents may have been classified, but the sense of awe remains. Whether those bodies were the product of imagination, Cold War secrecy, or something unearthly, they gave Roswell its enduring soul, the feeling that the truth was right there in front of us, hidden behind a curtain of fear, silence, and denial. For many, it wasn't just about aliens. It was about the government's ability to take something real and reshape it until no one could recognize it anymore. The people who lived through Roswell felt that they glimpsed something beyond explanation, only to have it erased and rewritten before their eyes. And as the stories of strange bodies in military trucks echoed through time, one question began to haunt every believer and skeptic alike: if those weren't human remains being carried out of the desert that night, then what on earth were they? Years after the dust settled over the desert plains of Roswell, the United States government finally offered an explanation, or so they claimed. It was called Project Mogul, a top-secret Cold War program so classified that even the soldiers stationed near it didn't know it existed. According to official accounts released decades later, this project was the true cause behind the strange debris found in 1947. It wasn't an alien craft. They said it was an experimental balloon, part of a mission designed to spy on the Soviet Union's nuclear tests. But the story of Project Mogul, while neat on paper, opened up a new layer of mystery that only deepened the intrigue surrounding Roswell. In the tense years following World War II, the U.S. was desperate to know how close the Soviet Union was to developing atomic weapons. Satellites didn't exist yet, radar could only see so far, and intelligence gathering relied on creative, often dangerous experiments. One of those experiments was the creation of massive high-altitude balloons equipped with sensitive microphones designed to detect the low-frequency sound waves produced by nuclear detonations. These balloons, launched from secret locations in New Mexico and elsewhere, were enormous, sometimes hundreds of feet long, and carried radar reflectors made of strange metallic materials. The idea was that these balloons would drift over enemy territory and record data from the upper atmosphere. The government's claim was that one of these top-secret balloons, part of Project Mogul Flight 4, crashed on a ranch near Roswell in early July 1947. The odd materials found: metallic foil, rubber strips, and balsa-like beams were supposedly remnants of this classified equipment. The strange symbols people saw in the debris? According to later reports, they were decorative tape made by a toy manufacturer, used to reinforce the balloon's structure. It was a clever, almost comical explanation, an alien mystery reduced to nothing more than children's tape and radar reflectors. But for many, that explanation raised more questions than it answered. If the debris really came from a top-secret project, why would the military allow local civilians to handle it? Why would they first release a statement claiming to have captured a flying disc before hastily retracting it? Why not simply say from the beginning that it was a classified weather experiment? The more people looked at the Project Mogul explanation, the less sense it made. Even researchers who believed in a more rational cause admitted that the timeline didn't fully line up. Flight logs for the supposed Mogul balloon that crashed near Roswell were incomplete, with key entries missing. Weather data didn't match, and the materials described by eyewitnesses, metal that could crumple and return to its shape, beams inscribed with strange purple symbols, sounded far more advanced than anything produced by 1940s engineering. Still, the Project Mogul story served its purpose. When it was officially introduced in 1994 as part of a U.S. Air Force report titled The Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert, it provided a plausible, patriotic cover for the events of 1947. It painted the military not as liars, but as guardians of national security, forced to hide their secret programs during the height of Cold War paranoia. The report even included diagrams, technical documents, and photos of balloon materials that vaguely resembled the debris described by witnesses. To the casual reader, it seemed conclusive. But to those who had spent years studying the case, it felt more like damage control than truth. Jesse Marcel's son, who had seen the debris firsthand as a child, flatly rejected the Project Mogul claim. He said what his father brought home that night didn't look like balloon fragments. It looked like technology, something purposeful and intricate. Many UFO researchers argued that the Project Mogul story was simply another layer in a decades-long effort to bury the truth. They believed the government had cleverly used a real but unrelated program to create a smokescreen, something believable enough to satisfy the media, but vague enough to keep curious minds guessing. Even more suspicious were the details about how Project Mogul was declassified. The document surfaced just as interest in Roswell was exploding again in the early 1990s, following television specials and best-selling books that reignited public fascination. Some saw the timing as too convenient. If Project Mogul was truly responsible, why wait almost 50 years to say so? And why did early Air Force statements about the Roswell crash make no mention of any classified operation at all? The contradictions piled up, and with them so did the doubts. Adding to the confusion was the sheer complexity of Project Mogul itself. The balloons were massive, their equipment sophisticated, and their flight paths unpredictable. Some did crash in the desert, scattering metallic-looking debris similar to what was found in Roswell. But none of the other crashes triggered the same frantic military response, the same retrieval of wreckage by armed guards, or the same rumors of non-human remains. If Project Mogul balloons had fallen elsewhere without incident, why did Roswell become such a tightly controlled operation overnight? Historians have suggested that perhaps the government's reaction in Roswell wasn't about aliens at all, but about the secrecy surrounding nuclear surveillance. The U.S. couldn't afford for the Soviets or even the American public to know the extent of its espionage efforts. So when the balloon crashed and locals stumbled upon it, panic set in. The military's contradictory messages, the rushed cover story, the threats of silence all could have been the result of bureaucratic confusion rather than cosmic discovery. Yet that explanation still doesn't satisfy those who were there. Witnesses described not only debris, but heat-scorched ground, strange hieroglyphic markings, and metallic beams that seemed to glow faintly under sunlight. None of those details appear in the Project Mogul reports. The story of decorative tape with cartoonish symbols felt like a desperate attempt to rationalize something that couldn't be rationalized. It was as if the government had taken fragments of the truth and rebuilt them into a story that sounded just real enough to close the case. And so, Project Mogul became both an answer and a mystery, in itself a theory designed to explain everything yet somehow explaining nothing. It quieted the skeptics for a time, gave the media a headline to print, and helped the Air Force draw a line under a story they wanted forgotten. But for those who still remembered the desert that night in 1947, the feeling lingered that what fell from the sky wasn't born of human invention, nor of Cold War secrecy, but of something much larger, something that could never quite be contained by the thin skin when the Roswell story first broke. The world was just beginning to learn what it meant to live under the constant gaze of the media. Newspapers were the heartbeat of information, and radio was the nation's pulse. In July of 1947, when the Roswell Army Airfield declared it had recovered a flying disc, the story spread like a shockwave across the United States. People gathered around radios, crowded into diners, and debated what it could mean. But within a day, the government's retraction silenced the frenzy, and the so-called weather balloon explanation became the new reality. Most Americans moved on, but the story of Roswell didn't die. It simply went underground, waiting for its moment to re-emerge. That moment came decades later. By the 1950s, America was living in the atomic age. The Cold War was in full swing, and fear hung in the air like static. People looked to the skies not just with wonder, but with suspicion. Strange lights, radar anomalies, and pilot reports of unidentified flying objects began to fill newspapers again. The government launched investigations, Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and finally Project Blue Book. These official inquiries were meant to calm public concern, but they only added fuel to the growing belief that something was out there. And every time UFOs made headlines, Roswell returned like a ghost, whispered about but never fully addressed. In 1947, The story had been buried by official denial, but by the 1950s it had transformed into legend. Comic books, pulp magazines, and science fiction films began to fill American culture with visions of flying saucers and visitors from other worlds. The idea of extraterrestrial contact became both thrilling and terrifying, a reflection of the same paranoia that defined the Cold War. Movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still and Earth vs. The Flying Saucers weren't just entertainment. They were cultural therapy, ways for a nation haunted by nuclear anxiety to explore its fears through fantasy. And through all of it, Roswell lingered in the background, a real-world mystery that no Hollywood script could match. By the late 1970s, public fascination with UFOs surged again, this time driven by new technology and a growing distrust of government secrecy. The Vietnam War, Watergate, and the release of the Pentagon Papers had changed how Americans viewed their leaders. The once unquestioned faith in authority was shattered. If the government could lie about wars and scandals, could it also lie about what crashed in the desert 3 decades earlier? It was at this moment that the Roswell story exploded back into the public eye. In 1978, nuclear physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed retired Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had first handled the Roswell debris. For the first time, Marcel publicly stated that the material he found was not of this Earth. His revelation reignited the case. Soon after, other witnesses came forward, locals, military personnel, and family members, each adding a new piece to the puzzle. Their testimonies painted a picture of a government cover-up so massive that it spanned generations. Books like The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore turned the story into a global sensation. Television specials followed, claiming to reveal new evidence, secret witnesses, and even leaked documents. Roswell was no longer just an old rumor. It had become America's most famous UFO mystery. Then came the declassified files. In the 1990s, as the Cold War ended, the U.S. government began releasing mountains of previously secret material under the Freedom of Information Act. Among the papers were references to flying discs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and strange radar incidents from the late 1940s. While none of them directly confirmed aliens, they proved one thing beyond doubt. The U.S. military had taken UFO reports very seriously, despite decades of denial. The Air Force's own investigations listed hundreds of sightings as unexplained. That single word, unexplained, was enough to keep Roswell alive in the public imagination. Television transformed the story into myth. Shows like Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, and later The X-Files turned Roswell into cultural currency. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was an idea, a metaphor for secrecy, cover-ups, and the limits of human understanding. By the time the supposed alien autopsy film surfaced in 1995 showing grainy footage of doctors dissecting what looked like an extraterrestrial body, millions were ready to believe. Even though it was later debunked as a hoax, it didn't matter. The myth had grown too big to contain. And while pop culture sensationalized Roswell, something else was happening quietly behind the scenes. Scientists and military officials were beginning to talk openly about unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, the modern term for UFOs. Documents from the CIA, the Air Force, and even NASA revealed decades of classified research into mysterious craft that defied known physics. Declassified memos referenced encounters that mirrored what had been described in Roswell, objects that maneuvered without wings, engines, or heat signatures. Suddenly, the line between conspiracy and reality began to blur. The release of declassified UFO reports in the 2010s and 2020s reignited mainstream interest once again. The U.S. government officially acknowledged that some encounters with unidentified craft remained unsolved. Videos from Navy pilots showing glowing, fast-moving objects were confirmed as authentic. In congressional hearings, intelligence officials admitted that we don't know what they are, for many. This felt like vindication, a slow, careful unraveling of the secrecy that began in Roswell. Media coverage exploded across every platform. News anchors who once mocked UFO stories now discussed them seriously. Scientists demanded transparency, journalists dug deeper, and the public, more skeptical than ever, began to connect dots. Roswell, once dismissed as myth, was now viewed through a new lens, one where secrecy and truth were no longer opposites, but partners in a dance as old as the Cold War itself. Through every era, print, radio, television, and now the digital age, Roswell has evolved with the media that tells its story. Each generation rediscovers it, reshapes it, and finds in it a reflection of its own fears. In the 1940s, it was fear of invasion. In the 1950s, nuclear annihilation. In the 1990s, government deception. And today, it's the fear that the universe might be more complex than we've ever dared to imagine. Roswell has become more than a mystery. It's a mirror held up to humanity's endless curiosity. A story retold not because it's solved, but because it never stops asking the question that began it all. What really fell from the sky that summer night in 1947? Today, the story of Roswell lives not just in history books or declassified reports, but in the heart of modern culture, where mystery, science, and speculation collide. It has evolved far beyond a single event. It's become a living legend, shaping the way we think about government secrecy, extraterrestrial life, and even our place in the universe. Every few years, new evidence, new testimonies, or new official statements breathe life back into the story, pulling millions back into that haunting question. What really happened in Roswell? In the digital age, the conversation has shifted from newspaper headlines to global networks. Social media has become the new frontier for UFO discussions, with millions of users dissecting every leaked photo, every government document, and every piece of testimony. Platforms like Reddit, YouTube, and TikTok host endless threads, videos, and theories about what crashed in New Mexico that fateful night. Some users point to declassified Pentagon footage showing craft that defy known physics, claiming it connects directly to Roswell. Others argue it is all a smokescreen, a psychological operation designed to distract the public from advanced military technology. The debates are endless, but they all trace their roots back to that desert in 1947. At the same time, governments around the world have begun taking the UFO or UAP phenomenon more seriously than ever before. In 2021, the Pentagon released its long-awaited UAP report, confirming that multiple military encounters remained unexplained. This wasn't a fringe topic anymore, it was official. Congressional hearings followed, with Navy pilots describing glowing, fast-moving objects that seemed to defy the laws of physics. These weren't anonymous witnesses, they were trained professionals with radar data, infrared recordings, and years of flight experience. To many, this marked a turning point. For the first time, the U.S. government publicly admitted that there were things in the sky that couldn't be identified, echoing the exact same uncertainty that started in Roswell decades earlier. Yet, despite the growing openness, secrecy still lingers in the air. Many of the files related to Roswell remain classified or heavily redacted. Witness testimonies are fragmented, and official explanations often contradict one another. Some claim the wreckage was part of a top-secret balloon program known as Project Mogul, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. Others argue that the technology recovered was far beyond what 1940s science could produce. And then there are those who insist that alien bodies were recovered, taken to hidden bases, and studied in secrecy. Each theory fuels the next, creating a loop of intrigue that refuses to fade. Pop culture continues to keep Roswell alive in ways the government never could. From TV shows like The X-Files and Roswell, New Mexico, to blockbuster films like Independence Day and Men in Black, the idea of aliens crashing on Earth has become deeply woven into global storytelling. It's more than entertainment, it's cultural mythology. Even documentaries and podcasts have joined in, turning Roswell into a constant conversation between science and speculation. Every new discovery, every official comment reignites curiosity and reopens old wounds of doubt and wonder. But what is fascinating is how Roswell has evolved from a story about aliens into a reflection of society's trust or lack thereof in authority. In the late 1940s, Americans largely accepted the government's explanations. Today, skepticism dominates. People question official narratives more than ever before. Every retracted statement, every redacted document, feels like another piece of evidence supporting the idea of a cover-up. Roswell has become a symbol of that tension, a touchstone for how secrecy breeds suspicion and how unanswered questions can echo for generations. Scientists, too, are beginning to reconsider what was once dismissed. With the discovery of thousands of exoplanets, the concept of extraterrestrial life is no longer science fiction, it's a legitimate field of study. NASA's recent establishment of a dedicated UP research division marks a quiet acknowledgement that the universe might hold more than we understand. Astrobiologists argue that if intelligent life exists elsewhere, it's statistically unlikely that Earth would never have been visited. Meanwhile, physicists debate whether technologies like those described in Roswell reports could exist through advanced propulsion systems or quantum field manipulation. Suddenly, the impossible doesn't seem so far-fetched. In modern research circles, the lines between UFO belief and scientific inquiry are beginning to blur. Organizations like All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and NASA's UAP study group are pushing for transparency, demanding better data and removing the stigma attached to reporting unknown aerial phenomena. The idea that professionals once laughed off UFOs as real, physical objects is now being discussed in the halls of Congress and the offices of intelligence agencies. The question has shifted from, do UFOs exist? To, what are they and where do they come from? And that subtle shift has reignited the mystery of Roswell in a way that feels more real than ever. As technology advances, so does our ability to analyze evidence. Satellite imaging, AI analysis of flight data, and new sensor technologies have opened unprecedented windows into our skies. Each unexplained sighting recorded by military pilots today is archived, studied, and compared to past incidents. Some researchers have even tried linking modern UAP encounters to Roswell-like patterns, flight behaviors, material descriptions, and electromagnetic interference that seem eerily similar. The possibility that these phenomena are connected across decades has turned Roswell from a historical curiosity into a cornerstone of a much larger puzzle. And while the debate rages on, one thing is undeniable: Roswell's power to captivate hasn't faded. Every generation rediscovers it, each interpreting it through its own lens. For some, it's proof of alien visitation. For others, a symbol of Cold War paranoia. And for many, a cautionary tale about how truth can be hidden in plain sight. It is not just a question of what crashed in 1947, it's a question of why the story continues to matter. Because whether it was an alien craft, a secret experiment, or something beyond both, Roswell has become the ultimate mystery that refuses to die, echoing through history, through politics, through science, and into the endless skies that continue to watch us back. And so, as we look back across the decades from that hot July night in 1947 to today's era of declassified files and government hearings, one truth stands out above all: Roswell changed everything. What began as a strange crash in the desert evolved into a global mystery that reshaped how humanity views the unknown. It sparked curiosity, fear, skepticism, and hope all at once. Whether you believe a UFO truly fell from the sky or that it was simply the government guarding a Cold War secret, Roswell forced us to ask questions we had never dared to before. It made us wonder just how much truth lies hidden behind official silence. It made us question whether our planet is truly alone. It made ordinary people into investigators, witnesses into legends, and a small New Mexico town into a symbol of the greatest mystery in American history. The story refuses to end because it's not just about aliens or conspiracies. It's about the human need to understand what we don't yet know. Maybe someday the full truth will be revealed. Maybe the evidence is already buried deep beneath classified vaults, waiting for the right moment to come to light. Or maybe the truth has been in plain sight all along, hidden beneath layers of confusion and secrecy. Until that day comes, the mystery of Roswell will continue to hover silent, unblinking and eternal, just like the stars above the desert where it all began.